what was the first thought that came to your mind when you heard the federal government's 2024 budget, 26.01 trillion naira? So for the purpose of this discussion, we are doing an overview. Your thoughts, please.
Well, the 26 trillion naira budget is, my first thought is, when you factor in where we are with inflation and where we have been with inflation over the last 2 years or thereabouts, is that this is not aggressive enough, is that we are under budgeting again. Maybe for understandable reasons, but then that remains to be seen, So I think my first thought is this budget is not big enough. And one would have thought, and one would have expected with the track record that this president boasts of, especially when it comes to the issue of revenues and fiscal management, one would have expected that this would have been something that he would have excelled at very quickly. But it looks as if it is business as usual. We're having a budget of 26 trillion, which is just about 5 trillion higher than the budget that we had in 2023. With inflation rates at about 23%, it means that the budget has shrunk. It means that in real terms, we are budgeting a lower figure this year than we did last year. If you convert, to make things worse, if you convert the budget to dollar terms, then it paints an even grimmer picture. It means that this budget is significantly smaller than the usual 23 billion dollar mark that we've budgeted over the last 10 years. So it looks as if the activities of government and the size of government is being planned to shrink. And that's significant. We need to take note of that. We're planning to shrink the size of government activity, at a time when indeed we need to be aggressively pursuing growth, and at a time when you probably need to be spending a whole lot more to generate the growth that our economy so desperately needs. So why is this the case? Well, the questions remain to be answered. The other thing that also crossed my mind is the information that was provided, by the Minister of Budget and National Planning was incomplete, and I found that quite intriguing. I'm not sure exactly why. So the standard practice, and budgeting is a cycle, is something that we've done for years, for decades. And in recent years, in the last 8 years, there are certain trends and standards have been put in place, and I think that those trends and standards were good. One is that we have now broken the course of closing our budget cycles late, getting approvals very much late into the succeeding year. So we're maintaining that tradition. However, the data, so usually when you're presenting your budget, you present the assumptions, one, and then you present the key highlights, and those highlights have to be about the expenditure, the breakdown of the expenditure, and the revenues, and the deficits. So what we've had is we've had some sort of breakdown of expenditure, but we do not have adequate information. There is no mention in the briefing about what portion of the expenditure will be recurrent and what portion is going for capital expenditure. And I wonder why. There is no mention of the expected revenues. There is no mention of the deficits. I'm just wondering if this was deliberate or if this is some sort of slip on their part.
Thank you so much, Segun. So these are very, very valid points that you raised. You said this is not aggressive enough. The budget is not aggressive enough. You also said it's incomplete. Right? The information is incomplete, and you're asking why is this the case? So this is why we are having a show like this, for us to point out gaps like this so that government can listen and do the needful. Right? So let's explore this angle you talked about earlier on about the budget not being aggressive enough. So the aggregate expenditure, which is estimated at 26.01 trillion naira, like we've been saying for the 2024 budget, includes statutory transfer of 1.3 trillion naira non-debt recurrent expenditure of 10.26 trillion naira. Debt service estimated at 8.25 trillion naira, as well as 7.78 trillion being provided for personal and pension costs. Segun, could you please break this down for the layman? Now, by the time you do the calculation, what exactly then is the real budget by the time you factor all of this into it?
Well, so what the government is basically saying is it will be spending 26 trillion naira for the 2024 fiscal year. And of that 26 trillion, a huge, what's the figure again? 11 trillion, I believe it is. I'm trying to look for it. Is going into debt service alone, you know, and this is alarming to say the least. I think it's 9 trillion. And then further to that, you are spending about 7 trillion on personnel costs and overheads. So if you combine these two alone, you are already talking of about 18, almost 20 trillion naira going into what we call debt and non-debt recurrent expenditure, which means if you take out the statutory transfers and you do just a quick math, we're having capital expenditure of somewhere around 5 trillion, 4 trillion, 5 trillion. I'm having to do these deductions because the information wasn't provided on a total budget of 26 trillion is just below 20% or thereabouts. That's just simply not good enough. So again, like I said before, we have a situation where we need to spend. Our infrastructure deficit is what it is very gross in terms of electricity, in terms of road transportation, in terms of rail transportation, our waterways. You know, there's a lot in terms of infrastructure. Let's not even go into healthcare, education, infrastructure, you know, and all of those other things. It's clear that we need to be spending a whole lot more than this on an annual basis to close those gaps and to cut that deficit down. So there's a lot of work for the government to do. So in layman terms, it just simply means that the government needs to spend a whole lot more. The government is not planning to spend enough money on each Nigerian to get us out of the economic situation that we're in. So one would hope that either of two things will happen. Either we'll get a supplementary budget sometime during the year or several supplementary budgets.
We've been talking about the 2024 budget, 26.01 trillion naira. And what Segun just said was that it is not aggressive enough, that we need to be spending more. What's your take?
Well, I would say it's not aggressive enough. I will say, number one, the government is being cautious. And here, the issue is really the problem of revenue to debt ratio as we speak. And the government, through all its conversations in swearing in, has emphasized that they don't want to do over-borrowing. And that will mean that, of course, you have to make do with what you have. So to a very large extent, this is a kind of a maintenance budget. You have to maintain the equilibrium as it is at the moment. You are able to fulfill your obligation to your creditors. Then, of course, those who are working, you are able to pay their salary. And I think this is what the budget is all about, in my own estimation. Except that the fact that, of course, the government also, through the Ministry of Finance, has also floated what they call the infrastructure fund, because that's where it's actually huge, where we have to speak about capital expenditure, because I think that the government is looking toward that infrastructure fund to see how we can use that to really shore up the infrastructure gap that is put at about 2.4 trillion US dollars. Is estimated from different rating organizations that Nigeria will need to spend annually between 80 billion US dollars to 150 billion US dollars, some say in 30 years, and for some people in 10 years, to be able to meet up with the gap of infrastructure, and that is massive. The entire budget of 2024 put together is just 34 billion. So it's not even up to what is estimated for a nation to spend in the next 10 years, for example, to be able to bridge that gap of infrastructure in the country. So is it ambitious? No. But there are some certain ambitious projections within the budget that really need, those assumptions need to be queried. You are projecting a budget for 2024, and you are assuming that the price of a dollar is going to come down. Now, what are we doing to bring that price down? We have not seen real substance. For example, as we speak, on Monday when that information was coming out, the dollar at the A&I window was selling above 700. At the power market, it was 1,048 naira to a dollar. So I think that for people to have projected that figure at 700 naira to a dollar in 2024 is overambitious.
Right.
That's one. Number two, putting the revenue calculations on a projection that the country will be able to produce 1,700,000 barrels per day through 2024 is also ambitious. Because the real issues or the fundamentals in the oil-bearing communities that are actually accounting for our inability to meet our OPEC quota has not actually also been put in place.
Yeah, but do you think this could be because of the revival of the moribund refineries and the private refinery that Dangote is about to float?
No, it has nothing to do, because what you are doing is that you have the quota that OPEC say you can sell. Nigerians sell 2.1 million barrels per day, but at the current, we are not able to even produce that 2 million barrels per day. Now, what is projected is that through 2024, we are going to be producing 1.7 million barrels per day. And the pricing is put at $73 dollars per barrel. Now, this for me are overambitious.
Okay.
Because looking at the fundamentals in the market and the volatility in the oil market internationally, we can't say for certainty that we are going to be able to sell oil at that figure throughout 2024. Don't also forget that there's a whole lot of conversation that is going on non-renewable source of energy, and a whole matter of nations are making progress towards actually moving out of the use of crude and the rest of it. So I think we really need to be a little more conservative and moderate in terms of these estimates that have been provided.
All right, let me take it back to Segun. I want you to react to some of the things that the host has said. He said he wouldn't agree with you that the budget is not aggressive enough. But rather, some of the sectors he mentioned, he talked about the production of 1.78 million barrels per day as being overambitious. He also talked about the peg for the exchange rate at 700 naira to a dollar as being, how do you make that kind of assumption, right? So I want you to react to this. He also talks about Nigeria's debt profile, and he said the country was playing safe. He actually said cautious, that's the word he used, and he's trying to make do with what we have. He called it maintenance budget. What's your reaction to this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think he disagreed with me. He just said exactly what you just said, which is that it's a maintenance budget, you know, so it's like, and that's exactly what I said. I said it's business as usual. So the budget has just been, you know, cut based on the last budget, and we're just going on as we have always been going. And I'm saying that, you know, for the problems that we have today, that's nowhere near enough. It's not going to be enough. You know, this is a statistical fact. Now, in terms of the assumptions, I agree with him 100%. In fact, add to those assumptions the assumption of inflation at 21%. We're trending at 26.7, in the upper 26% right now. And, you know, food inflation as we speak today from the MBS is 30%. And it's been going upwards, you know, so apart from a slight decline September to August, it's been an upward trend in the last year. So how has the government arrived at a 21% inflation benchmark for its budget? So all of the assumptions that we have put in this budget, perhaps with the exception of the crude oil price, which they've put at 73%, which is significant. I won't say significant, but lower than current crude oil prices. And given all of the instability in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine with Russia and all of that, the likelihood, and from energy experts, is oil prices would trend higher for the middle of next year. So yeah, that assumption may not be necessarily too wide off the mark, but every other assumption, just like Idahosa said, we have to question how they've arrived at these things. But this is not unusual, and for me, this is the point, and that's why I don't focus on that.
I want you to talk about the inflation rate in the proposed budget, which is pegged at 21% that he talked about. For the market woman on the street, or in the market, or for the Nigerian on the street, what does it mean? What does this mean? Well,
I think what it means is that they're telling us that prices of goods and commodities are likely to come down. Good. To use the layman's, and that's why, of course, I agree with Shegun completely. If you are having food inflation at the moment, which is trailing at 30%, and then, of course, we're already almost 27% on the general inflation figure. So how did we arrive at these figures? Then, of course, there must be that there's a concrete plan on the ground, either number one, to show up production of food items. Then, of course, we are going to have a less reliance on imported items. And all these things seems to be very contradictory to the monetary policy that the CBN is currently championing. Don't forget that just last week we were told that the 43 items that were kept away from CBN funding, forest funding, had also been thrown into the market. So all of these are going to put pressure on the value of the naira, really, in the interim. So for me, 21% inflation rate is like somebody waking up from a dream and seeing that things are getting well and better.
That sounds like a miracle, right?
It would be a huge miracle.
Yes. So let's talk about the social intervention scheme and the monies budgeted for that. I know this is one area that's been raising a lot of dust in the polity. I don't know, what are your thoughts here?
I have a very different view from most people when it comes to the issue of social intervention. I had this conversation at the park unveiling on Monday with
that was a program organized by
the National Assembly, House of Rep, the Committee on Public Accounts. And I was saying to them, you see, nobody throw money at poverty and will think he will conquer poverty.
Say that again.
There's nobody or no country that has thrown money at poverty and think that that money will be able to conquer poverty. It's not possible. And I think that is what we are doing with our social intervention. And I think we can be much more strategic in terms of these interventions. Government could actually channel this money into productive ventures.
And when we're talking about this money, it's pegged at 25,000 naira
for 15 million households. You see, the great question is this. Take, for example, a household of 4. 25,000 for how many months? 1 month? 2 months? When is the next tranche going to come? All of this conversation with me must need to have it. This is actually pulling us down and backward into poverty. What government need to do with these interventions is to see the government, the current government especially, during its campaign and in its manifestos, has said it's going to create hubs. My thinking is this money should be channeled into this hub. Take, for example, agricultural hubs. Today, Nigerians still import corn.
Does that make
That's strange. Not to talk about the almighty rice. And that was why the exportation of corn is banned. Something that should give us foreign exchange. We can't sell because those people who are producing feeds for animals are saying, look, we don't have corn, it's expensive. We can't even grow corn, that's what it means. What will it cost us to pull people into cooperative for corn farming? Even when we have identified that about 65% of our arable land, farmable land, has not been farmed. The government is just going to set out some acres of land or hectares of land, import some tractors here and there, get citizens involved. By this way, you are teaching people how to fish, not giving people fish. And that's what the Chinese proverb says. If you give people fish, you feed them for one day. But if you train them to fish, you have fed them for life. And I think that's where we should be doing with our social intervention.
Fantastic. I'll have Segun react to this because this is very germane. But before that, though, welcome back, Segun. You were saying, wrap up your thoughts, then please react to Idahosa's thoughts as regards.
Yes, so I was just trying to quickly, yes, thank you. Apologies for the break. So I was just trying to talk about our budget and the fact that we're nowhere near what we ought to be doing. If you look at even our neighboring countries, let's not even go to the developed, economies around the world. Let's not talk about the likes of Finland and Sweden that have per capita budgets of $24,000. Let's not go there. We recognize that they're at a different phase of their, social economic development. Let's just stay in Africa. Nigeria is ranked 17th as of 2021 on per capita budget, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse because our budget is actually shrinking in dollar terms. Ghana has a per capita budget of around $600 per capita. South Africa has about $2,000 per capita, $2,600 or thereabouts. Libya, in spite of all of the crises that we've had in that country over the last number of years, is still doing better than us. In fact, the only countries that are worse than us are countries that are at war. Congo, Sudan, I can't remember the other two, right? So clearly, we have a problem. Our per capita budget, guess how much our per capita budget is for this year? It's $166. For 1 year, you are planning to grow your economy and pull your populations out of poverty, and you will be spending $166 per person, per individual. And these things are real because each one of those people will consume resources. Each one of those people will either have to use a road or will use power, will use healthcare, will go to a school. So you have to spend money maintaining your population. So if you convert that to Naira, it's 130,000 Naira per capita. It's nowhere near enough. And that, speaks to our revenue, our very famous revenue problems. And like I have always said, our revenue leakage problem, not our revenue gathering or collection capacity. It's the fact that, one, we're not collecting enough, we're not efficient enough with our collection processes, but more crucially, and perhaps the most significantly, is that a lot of that money does not make it into the official account of government, gets frittered away through corruption. So these problems are the problems that need urgent attention and needs to be addressed if we are to make the kind of development strides we need to be making to pull our populations out of poverty. And that's why I wanted to focus more on the quantum of the budget, rather than maybe the underlying assumptions, which, like I was saying earlier, the government has always gotten wrong anyway. They've always been very ambitious and over-aggressive with a lot of these assumptions. Now, coming back to, the point that you guys were talking about when I rejoined, I agree with my colleague, on air this morning, and you do not throw money at problems. Social intervention programs, especially for developing economies that are struggling with poverty, at best can only be short-term bridging measures. So you need to develop a very clear policy framework that will pull people out of poverty. In the process of doing that, because that will take time, you might be talking of a 2-year, maybe 5-year, maybe even a 10-year plan. So in the process, there are people that are dying today. So you then say, okay, let me give these people some sort of intervention. And just like, my colleague has said, I don't even believe that even that short-term intervention should be cash, because, for goodness sake, what will 25,000 naira do to a household that even by the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics estimate, the average household size in Nigeria is 5. And, even that I questioned. We know that for the people at the bottom of the pyramid, a household can be 15, a household can be 20. Also, we have the population density problem to go along with that. So these problems are humongous, and it's not a problem you can solve by throwing cash at it. You need to be more deliberate. You have to look at what the likes of India, for example, did to curb its poverty problem. Are there poor people in India? Yes, but poverty is reducing, it's reclining. They are pulling more people out of poverty than are entering poverty in India. What did they do? How did they do it? Yes, they have social intervention programs, but very crucially, they also had capacity development programs that were backed by development funding for business activities. This is how you create wealth. We are not supposed to be pursuing poverty eradication or poverty alleviation. We're supposed to be pursuing wealth creation. And if we do that, then maybe we can begin to move the needle in the direction that the needle needs to be moved. But this social intervention, 1 trillion naira over a 3-month period, in my opinion, is more or less money down the drain. It will not even scratch the surface of the problem.
This is a series on sectorial budgeting vis-a-vis best international best practices that we're doing here. This is a proposal yet. This budget, 26.01 trillion naira, is a proposal made by the federal government, right? The National Assembly is yet to react. What would you like to see as we wrap this up?
Well, of course, I know that certainly, like Shegun has said, the figures are quite low. And I know that National Assembly will definitely have to push this figure up. That's certain. Because here, really, like I said in the earlier show, the members of National Assembly have 3 basic functions. Mm-hmm. The first assignment is representation. Then, of course, they have law-making function and then oversight function to ensure that the laws that are made or the Appropriation Act is followed to the letter. Now, but the key function is that of representation. And because they have to go back knocking on the door of the electorate every 4 years.
For re-election.
Yeah, for re-election. They must have something to tell the electorate that they have done in 4 years. And if that is not factored into the budget, it won't go right with them.
So this is where budget padding comes in.
Oh yes, that's the very popular phase of budget padding, because they also want to make provision for their constituencies such that by the time they are coming home, whether it's on recess or at the end of their tenure, they should be able to say, while I was in the National Assembly, I was able to attract federal presence to our constituency.
So this is for the good of the people?
It's actually for the good of the people they represent.
In other words, budget padding is not necessarily a bad thing.
It's not necessarily a bad thing, and I think it's the way, of course, the narrative around it is what makes it bad. What actually should happen, like I said to the Public Account Committee, is that that job should not be post-mortem. And then you'll be shocked why that conversation was going on Monday, that it said the document they have to work with as the 10th Assembly is the audited reports of the federal spending of 2019. So they say they are immersed in looking at things that happened 4 years ago. The 2020 audited report of Federation is not ready. 2021 is not ready. 2022 is not ready. And this is issue. How do you run a government like this?
It's almost impossible.
Now, budget is supposed to be a control mechanism. Mm-hmm. And what you do with the audit is to look at it. What happened? What lessons can we learn as we move forward? But here is a country that is dealing with the issues of 2019, and the world has since moved. Today, in terms of strategic management, nobody talks about 5-year plan anymore. People are talking about 3-year plan. Because like the management expert says, the world is volatile, very volatile. The rate of change is at speed of light. Things are uncertain. There is complexity, ambiguity in the entire political economy of the globe. All of these will not have to wait for you as a nation. And so if we must be competitive, we must do things right. And that is what it is. So, and that doing things right starts with our budget. And like I said to them in that committee, this idea of one-line budget or budgeting approach, or the one they talk about incremental budgetary approach, is not what Nigeria should adopt. We should be able to move away from that into project and performance budgeting, where we know that we're going to say we're doing budget this year, and this budget is going to focus on a project. And of course, we are told that, look, within the year, this is how much money we are going to gather or raise toward this project, and this is a milestone which we need to achieve in a year. Then it will be very easy for auditing to be done. Mm-hmm. So we know what exact work needs to be done, what project needs to be invested in, and how much money that is coming in. Like I've always said to people, you see, if you look at the budget as it is presented, 8 trillion plus for debt service, 7 trillion personnel and pension. Now, put that together. That's over 15 billion. Mm-hmm. Of the 26 trillion, what is left? 11 trillion.
Yeah.
Now, statutory transfer, you have 1.3. So you have just barely 10 trillion left for your budget. And this is a tragedy. So at the end of the day, if you ask me, what do I really expect to see government do in the next 1 year? Mm-hmm. I don't see much.
Oh.
I don't see much. Because that figure is a pittance. I was just looking and I said, just as I guessed, Ministry of Defense, for example, in the US, their 2024 budget is about $735 billion.
That's just the Ministry of Defense.
Yes, Ministry of Defense. And we're talking about a whole nation, 216 million people, 34 billion US dollar budget. And this budget is not something that we are all sure the revenue is going to come. And this is where, of course, Shegun mentioned, because we have not really been given the details of how these workings are going to happen, where the revenue source is going to come from. Mm-hmm. Because definitely, of course, there's going to be some borrowing.
Absolutely, which is what Shegun...
to fund the budget.